Exactly. I do.
A morning
Let's see this happen. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, I'm down. Fenderson, I wanted to ask about a few things, but the first, and something that I alluded to earlier, and I was very curious about, is the adult literature, the adult fantasy literature community, fantasy science fiction, I should say, is so unique from the rest of the literary community.
It is.
And the kidlit community, it tends to be a monolith, but I think there's some sort of magic with regards to the, no pun intended, the fantasy and science fiction community there. And I'm curious, now that you're kind of on the back end of your tour for Abeni Book 2, what have you found to be kind of the differences and the nuances from your experience between these communities?
No, thanks for that question. It's been an experience because, as a person who is mostly in the adult sci-fi fantasy, for one, people there know me.
Yeah, for sure.
So
they sure
I
do.
get people tend to know me, whereas the kids are like, who are you? And I guess that's one of the biggest things, that I interact with these younger readers.
Yeah.
I get to do school visits, and it's very different. They're very honest.
Yeah,
They are.
They sure are.
They'll just ask me, like, question and answer, how much do you make?
Always.
Or that kind of thing. They're also really earnest if you grab them. Like, if they haven't read it before, like, they will, like, they'll, like, show their shocked faces and do all of these things. And it's great because middle grade, they don't think they're too cool yet.
Yeah.
And so they're really very interested. And so I think I've had probably, sorry, my adult folks, more fun talking with the kids. I got to do this thing called Djèlí Theater, where I got to get them come up and I have them doing a scene and they're running. And I said, I can't get adults to do this.
That's all right.
It's like I can get them to really get into it. And I think what's great is that once they're hooked, they are hooked.
Yeah.
Like, like one of them told me, like, I got like their parent room said, like, you came and now they read the entire book.
Yeah.
Like in a week, right? Like, and so I think that's great.
I wonder if a part of that is because in the adult SFF space, we are so used to fandoms and getting hyped up over like our little communities that we love and this art that we really enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think carrying that down into children's literature, a lot of the apparatus of children's literature has not adopted that sort of approach to like really geeking out over these things that are totally deserving of that respect and excitement. And so I think that what I found is, because I've done these events with a couple of authors who have done fantastic work in the adult space, yourself, Garth Nix, and others, and they're always so good at bringing that excitement down. We need more of that.
Right, and what's really funny though is coming from those spaces, one of the first things you realize is like, oh, nobody knows who I am here, and
it's humbling.
And like, it's really humbling, right? Like, oh, I go somewhere and I have like a big signing, and like I'm sitting next to the person who does the Narwhal and Jelly book, so I'm sitting next to Gallagher and Max Meow, and it's like, here, my 5, and your line is like around the corner.
Pete the cat over here,
and it's interesting because it makes you work. It's like, okay, I have to entice folks to read my things because here are these other names, and so I actually kind of enjoy that in getting to see the space that's so very different from the adult space, and the dynamics and how you sell books, how you approach the books. It's just very different. And I do think I tell people, I said a lot of people who write adult fiction could spend some time cutting their teeth into YA, and especially the middle grade market, because you realize how different it is.
They say it's a tough market, and it's because you have to be very genuine, sincere, and honest, and kids will sniff you out right away.
Oh, right away, yeah.
And also, you're not selling to kids. You're enticing kids to want to read your books, but you're not trying to sell these books.
And you're not. And that's one thing I think I got from the first time I did a book event was with Danielle Clayton, right? And it was perfect because she's a pro. And one of the first things I realized is, like, when you show up, you can't spend a whole time trying to sell your book.
Truly.
You're not, because then you look just like the salesman who shows up with the the encyclopedia set back in the day, or the vacuum cleaner. It's like, no, I talk about my book a little bit, and then I talk to them about reading and asking them what they like.
Yeah.
And you ask them what they like, you get involved, and you actually take an earnest attempt to, like, what's your video game that you like?
Sure.
What if my book was a video game? Would you play? And they will completely open up to you.
Yeah. Let's talk about my book in comparison to this anime that you're
really that you're anime, or the books that you like. Exactly. I love getting from them, because it was just, I love this book and I love this book, and and let them tell you about the other authors. You can't get jealous because they like these books that are not yours, right? And so I think that is a very interesting dynamic.
It's funny you mentioned Danielle. She literally just emailed me today about an event for Magic School Books. She's doing a lot of good work. And speaking of like book comparisons, we see a lot of dragons in literature these days. Yeah. Dragons are
dragons are back in.
And so I'm curious, like how, and I'm not going to spoil anything.
I got two dragons in here. I got two.
What was the calculus with trying to create something that pays respect to obviously what's out there, but also does something that's like uniquely yourself?
Yeah. So one, I heart dragons. Yeah. I think since I was a kid, I was like, remember the old like, I don't know, it was the Rankin Bass Hobbit book. Okay. I had as a kid, and it had a picture of Smaug in it. And so that got me into dinosaurs, because I love dragons, right? And so to this day, if I'm doodling, I'm going to doodle a dragon. Okay. It's like what I'm going to doodle. And so I've always loved dragons. I read all the Dragonlance books.
Sure.
And then when I was younger, I loved The Voyage of the Dawn Treader and C.S. Lewis. He turned to a dragon, right? So I can think of so many things. Remember that old book, like my grandfather's dragon or my father's dragon or what have you? And so I've just always been into them, and I wanted to put them in a book. And I think a lot of times people have the idea that dragons come from one part of the world and they can only have that. And I had long ago been interested in West African mythology and a lot of African mythology, period. And I came across these two creatures that are very much like dragons, right? And I was like, oh, they have to go in the book. And so I was going to put one in here. I said, oh, no, I'm about. And there are many others, but I decided to put them both in here just so people know, like, look, this is a different cultural aesthetic and everything, but you're creatures like dragons.
Sure.
And of course, at the end of the day, the dragons, I think we do this a lot with fantasy. The dragons I create are not exactly like they would have been like the West African dragons. We're obviously pulling from the fact that we've grown up with Dungeons and Dragons and all these other dragons. So my dragons are like a mix of all those things, but you can't escape where they're from, and they tie into both of them I pull from the things that they do, to dealing with gold or drinking up a river. That is actually part of these West African epics. Both of them come from epics, by the way.
Yeah.
These lengthy epics about these, where these dragons are involved. And I got to pull them in here and have a lot of fun with them.
That's fantastic. And dragons are obviously adults, kids, anyone who hears that is going to be super excited.
Yeah.
The thing that obviously will in fact get people turning the pages, I say obviously, not obviously, but that kids might not realize are the journeys that Abeni goes through emotionally.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious where, if you could elaborate a little bit on the individual journeys, maybe from book 1 and book 2, but also kind of what your calculus was in drafting that.
So, Abeni is a character. I wanted to write a book. Let's say this. I wanted to write a book that reminded me of the time when I loved books the most. Yeah. Still love books, but when I was really into books, and that was when I was reading Madeline L'Encle's Wrinkle in Time. Okay. I was reading Ursula Le Guin, right? This is what I was reading when I was younger. What I liked about those books, for one, they were hefty books, and they made me feel when I was reading them as an elementary school kid, as a middle school kid, that I'm reading something like grown-ups, right? Yeah. But it's talking to me, and it's not talking down to me.
Yes.
And it's giving me it's making me think in different ways that I hadn't before. And I wanted to do that in the books that I read. I wanted books that, younger readers could read it and feel that they were reading something big. I wanted books, because it's supposedly in that age group that publishers don't want to touch, that middle grade to YA. I wanted to have older kids, and I've had that, older kids who have defied the whole we don't read down, who are like, no, I like this because she's a few years younger than I am, but the situations and the emotional things, I can relate to that. And I wanted adults I've had adults write me and say, like, I was reading this with my kid, and I kept on the night. I was like, I want to see what's going to happen next. I wanted this book to appeal to everyone. I know that's a little hard, right? Sure. And so I put little things in there, like some gross humor that people, that kids may like, and things. But part of that was this emotional journey. Thinking about what it was like when we were that age, what it was like when you kind of exit the 2nd, 3rd grade where everybody's kind of cool and your friend.
Sure.
And things start changing a bit, and the dynamics start changing, and what it's like to try to get along with people who might be disagreeable. and realizing like that person might just not like me. Why don't they like me, right? Somebody doesn't like me. And, Abeni has to deal with those just interpersonal dynamics, both back in her village, you see, and then with these new friends she meets. There's one friend, Zania. Zania is the hard to get along with person, right? And she has to figure out and navigate, how do I get along with this person who just doesn't seem to like me for no reason?
Sure.
How can I and I have to get along with him because we have to work together. And so I wanted to get that in there, and then I wanted the larger dynamic.
Yeah.
The fact that she is dealing with some actually traumatic, earth-shattering stuff, right? It's found family because her family is ripped apart, right? Her whole village is ripped apart. Her whole life is ripped apart.
It's not a spoiler. That happens
that happens really early. And now I don't want to give the spoiler, but just when you think, okay, she's kind of settled in now, suddenly her whole life is then turned upside down again in book 1. And what's really big here is she's saddled with this responsibility where she's like, wait a minute, I have all this responsibility to take care of this younger person, and I'm a young person, right? And I wanted to have her this person who has to deal with all of these things, and it's not like she's just going to she has an indomitable spirit, certainly, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
She has to actually sit down and deal with it. She has to sit down and deal with the fact, especially in book 1, there's a lot about how she realizes the adults lied to her in some ways, right? Like one of the reasons these things happen is because they didn't tell her the truth, and that's like a real sore point with her. It's like that adults aren't telling me the truth. They're holding back, and that's causing problems. And so I wanted to get into all of that. And in the second book, I have where she's come to deal with all of that, but then she was also the country bumpkin from this small village, and she's now suddenly realized the world is massive.
Yeah.
Right? Everything I think I understood about the world and how things work
does
city. Not. She goes to a city for the first time. Her jaws are dropping, and she realizes she's really for the first time realizing my whole life that I thought was everything was this little speck.
Yeah.
And there's all of this out here, right? And it can be overwhelming. And it's how do I deal with all of this, right? Especially since her quest gets derailed in this other way, and she finds somebody else she doesn't get along with, and she has to deal with. And so I'm trying to kind of have these interpersonal things that I think everyone can relate to, kind of growing up, but then also these larger things where we kind of put ourselves in their shoes and say what would I do in these situations?
And it's very realistic because you mentioned a couple of these things, and I do respect that about these books, is that you don't pull punches, and I think that it harkens back to the time where there wasn't a children's literature per se, and it was just kids reading these books that they are interested in.
Yeah.
And nowadays, the machinery of publishing sometimes says, hey, you got to write this way for kids. And it's almost like trust the kids to discern themselves. And you kind of toe that line really effectively. Yeah. And so I'm really curious, sort of alongside that, how is reality reflected what you're trying to write? Because you mentioned adults lying to kids, and we do see that in reality.
And so there's a lot of there's simply the reality of adults dealing. Abeni often has these adults in her life, and she they try to determine things for her, and she has to figure out at what point she defies them. That's one thing. She's a person who defies things. And I also did this culturally. There's a whole part in the beginning where she's very rude to adults, and she comes from a culture where being rude to adults is absolutely anathema, right? You literally get on your knees to say hello to auntie or some of the grandmother. And so also, I've had people read this from these cultures, and they're like, she's talking to this adult like this. It's this is scaring me. I'm looking around my shoulder, right? And so she's put in these situations where she's not even used to dealing with adults like this. But she has to, because of these situations. She has to make these choices. And then there are also all of these real life things I'm getting at. In the first book, I do it with allusions, but there's allusions to slavery. Yeah. Right? There's allusions to colonialism. In the second book, there's allusions to ideas of resource wars. Mm-hmm. There's allusions to things about child soldiers, not give away a huge from the first book. And so I wanted to bring in these heavy topics because, again, the books that I was thinking about, even if I didn't always understand them at the time, The Wrinkle in Time and all these things, they were dealing with some heavy topics. C.S. Lewis was dealing with some heavy topics. Sure. I didn't even get the religious tones. I was like, Aslan is who? I was a whole adult before I was like, what? Those books I read in elementary school? What? Right. And so, I wanted to bring in these heavy elements because I think, for one, like you said, I think kids are able to deal with them.
Totally.
And some people were like, is it too much? I said, I think kids can deal with this. And even I was thinking that. And I have to really give it up to my editor, Ali Fisher at Starscape, where she would let me know, like, no, it's okay. Or, if somebody dies in here, she's like, don't beat around the bush. Don't be euphemistic. Say they died.
Sure.
Right? Don't, because kids will want to know, did they die? Is that what you're saying? They're dead?
They're going to be curious.
Yeah, don't, because if you don't say that, they're going to say, like, well, why didn't you say they were dead? And I was like, maybe that's too much. They're like, no, they can deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of heavy topics, right, and really not shying away, you bring, I can tell as someone who is a big fan of, like, Ring Shout and some of these other novels, and we're going to get into that. You do, I can tell where you bring some of these themes in, and I can see how it would appeal really to readers of all ages. I don't think that this is like these books are, and that's my favorite type of middle grade, is the books that have
that we still want to read.
And that these themes are resonant to different people for different reasons, and so there's so much loaded there. And I think almost subconsciously, when we were just so invested in these topics in real life, we imbue them in our stories.
Yeah, I think so.
And when we write fearlessly, and so I'm really curious about a particular type of trope that I observed in your writing, and it's these sassy characters. And I hesitate to use the word sassy because I don't know if that's the right word.
No,
but like,
I see what you're getting at.
Yeah, like you get like the Ash or the Sadies, and like I'm curious where that comes from, like because you write that so effectively.
I love the chaos characters.
Okay.
I call them chaos characters. And for this one, you're probably talking about Zuri, the ship captain. Yeah, and I love a character who shows up. I mean, I just like this in writing. I like it in various media. I love it when a character shows up and they just defy the norms.
Sure.
They'll say anything, and they're a wild card. And people are like, I don't know what to make of you. And you got it right. Sadie City from Dejin and Cairo series. Yeah, I love that kind of chaotic character. And so I knew I wanted to bring her in, and I get to play, it's fantasy, I get to do a kind of swashbuckling thing as a sailor. I love those characters because I think people like them. I think people gravitate towards them, and I've had people say, "Are we going to see again?" Because she's just a funny character. And I really and it's funny, when I first did her, just so you can get behind the scenes, when I first created her as a character, she was actually much older.
Okay.
I had her as a full adult.
Okay.
And then, Andrew was like, like her story, she's a full adult, these are kids. And I said, you're right. Why is she an adult? It's like, I want it to be in there, right? It's like, no, she's in their space. And if they have to deal with an adult like that on a constant basis, it's going to be different. So I aged her down. And that was so perfect to be where she's a little older than them.
Sure.
But she's still a kid in her own way, right? She's still this young woman. So she's like, for the YA readers, there's somebody in there for you. Yeah, and she is this person who is much more confident in her skin in many ways. And I won't say she's kind of a role model for them, but she's kind of a template and letting them know, like, hey, yeah, you can be this, yeah.
Do you embody these chaos characters? Are they you, or are they someone in your life?
Maybe they're who I want to be.
Okay, who you want to be.
Maybe they're who we want to be, right? We want to be the person who is just fearless, who will just, they're always the comedic characters, right? Yeah. Like, Zuri has quips. She's like, I even have a what the... She even does almost a shut the front door phrase in here where she's like, what the? Yeah, and I like those characters who, but you named it a Sadie, who, the characters you can't take anywhere, but you want them to be there for you if something happens.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so, I guess if you were to, we're talking about characters, obviously. Abeni, what parts of yourself have you imbued in Abeni, would you say?
Because don't we all do that?
We have to.
People always say, is this right or you? And I said, they're probably a piece of me, of course.
It has to be authentic.
Because you're thinking of yourself.
Yeah.
In there, right? And so, I think Abeni, if I would say anything, Abeni is the me from a kid.
Okay.
Who always wished I could find that wardrobe.
Yeah.
And walk off to meet a magical satyr, in the snow. We're all, every time I push it open, nothing there yet.
Right, this is the wish fulfillment.
Pull open the shipper robe. And so, it's like, so she's this person who gets to go out and have these adventures, right? But I also want to make a person who is fearful. right? She doesn't want to do this.
Yes.
Because I often think like, and that's kind of like the me then and the me now. The me then is like, I'm ready to go off. The me now is like, okay, wait a minute. So she's like that little mix. She's like, I don't want to go off. I don't want to be a heroine. All I want to do is get back to my little village.
Sure.
That is what I want. I'm not asking for this adventure. And I really want to make her this kind of reluctant heroine who's thrust into these things and knows she doesn't really want to go off and do it. She has this like, and so I guess that's the two bridges of me, that childhood me and the more adult me who is like, I just want to go home, get cozy. It's cold out.
I'm sure there was an element of the childhood version.
And there's a child who wants to, of course, see the world and see these things. And she's getting to do so.
Yeah.
And she's even given this choice in book 1 where she can go back, right? Okay. But she's like, I'm not done.
Okay.
And so I still have to go, right? Yeah.
I want to circle back to what's next for Abeni, but I also want to ask, this is partly for me, I just, going back to Ring Shout, which is just, I bring it up because my wife and I just watched Sinners. And
Sinners is doing a lot of work for Ring Shout right now.
I was going to say, but
it is one of the #1 books that people talk about. In fact, I have to do 3 different things coming up that are all Sinners Ring Shout related. People want to talk to me about it. Thank you, Ryan Coogler. My book sales are doing well right now.
But if Ryan Coogler wants something else to adapt, I told him, coming out of that theater, my wife was like, that was fantastic. And I'm like, if you thought that was good, go read Ring Shout.
Yeah.
And
thank you.
It's not that you will forget. I mean, it's not that you will move past Sinners because it's so strong on its own. It's such a beautiful piece of art. Yeah. But with Ring Shout, you do something that, as an artist, I don't know if you have this experience where you're reading something else and you get angry because you didn't think of something like
I get that all the time. I get envious. I'm like, my friend always was like, I felt that was inside me. But I couldn't get it out. Yeah. I read something so good. I think that's when I first read like N.K. Jemisin's The 100,000 Kingdoms. I was like, enslaved gods were like, God, I say this, and I've told Nora this. I said, when I read your stuff, I went back and erased everything out of it. I was like, my imagination is obviously not running on the cylinders and shit. I was undervaluing myself. I did. I freed myself after that to like really imagine. Yeah.
And so I think and I'm not going to spoil anything about Ring Shout. Everyone needs to go and read that. But the monsters are just so clever and based off of real life racist individuals. And I think that we do that in children's literature. Like we try and so in Shad Hadid, which is like the necromancers are like these kind of insular, like you're part of the community. If you're not, you're out. Right. And we try and imbue that here.
All these social issues in our own way through monsters in many ways. Yeah, and I do that, and certainly that's done here. Like Abeni of the Kingdom of Gold. There's a kingdom, it's Kingdom of Gold, the Gold Kingdom. And it's really based on, actually, if anybody's familiar with West Africa, the Akan kingdoms, and like Akan-speaking kingdoms, so the Ashanti Empire, for instance. And the whole idea of their stool, in fact, is that there's a whole period where the British demand their stool of the king, and that is the seat and symbol of their society. This is one of
the empires that had a lot of gold, like
right, and the gold, they have a ton of gold. Yes, in fact, they were known as the Gold Coast. That's how they first start trading with the Portuguese, because they're just mining gold, right? Okay. And gold is so important in their society. Have you ever seen, like, in Ashanti King, they have gold flakes, it's everywhere. And so I was like, what if I create something, it's not the Ashanti, and if I'm too good at people who are Ashanti, I'm not talking about them, but I created something kind of based on that, where they're literally gold bending.
Yeah.
They're literally, they can, and so, again, my inspiration is from everywhere. Last Airbender, one of the greatest things ever created. And so, in this case, I have them gold bending, where they can literally take gold, make it liquid, and then do anything want with it, and they even do dances, right, to do it. And so, but you find out, I don't give it away, of course, but this kingdom, in order to do this gold, they have to do a lot of unsavory things. Yeah. And it turns out that their history of what they think of themselves is not it.
Okay.
It's kind of like that. It's kind of like Thor Ragnarok when the ceiling broke, and it's like, this was us, right? And so there's also this whole idea in here about what do nation states or kingdoms tell about themselves that may not be true, right? How do they create these ideas of themselves by not wanting to face the truth of their history? And that's a big thing. There's a character near Amma, and I really get to play along with this, where she goes through, talking about a change, she goes through person. She's a princess. She's very invested in the kingdom. She's not likable at all. And she has to go through issues of loss and everything else to come to terms with the truth about her society that she doesn't want to deal with. And so, yeah, I'm throwing a lot in here.
No, but you do that where you force readers to confront societal constructs in everything you write. I do want to talk about the cover for a second because it's such a good cover. And the one thing that booksellers always tell you that your publisher will never tell you is that the cover really sells the book.
Oh, you don't have to tell me that.
That's
anyone who tells you that's not true is lying. Yeah,
and publishers will try and tell you.
Yeah, no,
like,
absolutely not. Especially for kids. Let me tell you something. When I used to go, even in high school, I went and I was looking in my Barnes and Nobles back in the day. Sorry, that was what we had. We went looking in those places. It was like, I'm looking at the covers.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna go read the back,
sure.
And if it's like, oh, this is stupid, I'm not interested. Sure. But it's the cover that grabs me.
You start with the front, then you flip it over.
Yeah,
and you
exactly.
Then
you read it. Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about, because often with cover design, it's a conversation with the illustrator.
It is, and it was a lot of back and forth. And it's the illustrator who had done it for this as well, a Kenyan artist.
Okay.
And I really worked with him because what I wanted to do was in the first book. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not for. Look at this one for Abeni's song. It has her as brand new, just out of this small place. By this time, she's seen things.
Yes.
And this Abeni, and so I wanted her to have So if you see, like, you compare it here, she's much more. I'm the country bumpkin. I've just left my small village, and she goes to another village, but she never really leaves the forest completely. In this one, like you said, she's in kingdoms and everything, and so this one is a person who is, she's seen things, she's a bit more determined, but it's kind of like an Empire Strikes Back, where things are bad happening in the background. So I have the Bat Riders, who I'd first put in there, and they're actually based on the West African folklore of, like, these creatures that are supposed to, like, they're different, depending on who you talk to, there are different answers.
Okay.
Some say this creature, the Emotia, are these short men, and the best thing I can think of, like goblins or something with red hair and gray skin. And some say, oh no, they're sorcerers, and others say, oh no, they're giant bats who live in trees and they have claws that might snatch you away. And as you know, as any good fantasy, what do you do with those? You reinterpret them like a token would. And so I interpret them like, what if all these people are just having the wrong idea, and it's actually these smaller, gray-skinned, almost goblin-like creatures with sharp teeth, and they ride giant bats.
I remember when they first showed up, and I was like, "This is just the coolest idea," because I mean.
And so you get to see them back here, the blood skulls with the face, and then you have a new character, who is one of my favorite characters to introduce here. And so the big baddie in this world is a guy called the Witch Priest.
Sure.
Think of him as your Sauron. Literally, it's literally not human, in fact. And actually what he wants to do is actually much worse than even the people who follow him know he wants to do. But he has an adopted human daughter, right? A mortal daughter. And I tried to play with this dynamic. So there's also the issue, she's a little older. Again, somebody there for the YA folks. She's older, and she's also a person dealing with truth and lies.
Sure.
And she's like Gamora and Thanos in some
Zuko.
Ways, right? Or Zuko, in a sense, she's very much, that's a good one, she's very much a Zuko, where she's now really wants to please her adopted father.
Sure.
And even he's confused, like, why do I have this mortal girl around? So it's also impacting him in what ways? You get to meet the Witch Priest for the first time, but I really get to also tell her story. And so you have this, it was really great to have these shifting dynamics, so it's not just a Benny story altogether, but you have these other characters that are being introduced. And so I have her, you see Abeni, and now there's danger. There are the Bat Riders behind her, and also coming is the Witch Priest's daughter who is now hunting her.
And I love that she's in this cover as well, because what you play with is this idea of mortal versus spirit, and everyone kind of looks down on these mortals. Mm-hmm. And yet the mortals are constantly kind of proven. And that, like, hobbits kind of...
the mortals, everybody's like, you're just, like, Abeni has to deal with the fact that her friends are, like, though they act like people her age, they are actually 80.
Sure.
They're actually much older, and they have powers, and she doesn't, right? And so here you have this other person who's really determined to prove herself to her father, this larger-than-life being, to go out and hunt, but she has her own, and then people get to meet the huntsman, who is, and it's funny, when I first did this, she didn't exist as a character when I first thought this out. It was just supposed to be the huntsman. And then I started, how stories go. I'm a plotter. And so I plotted out, but new things can arise. And as I'm sitting there looking at it, I said, I need something else in here.
Yeah.
And suddenly this character was born, and I love the dynamic between her and the huntsman. Is almost like the worst father figure.
Yeah.
Sure, he has a bad father figure, but then this other bad guy who is like, you don't have to follow that. Follow me, right? It's the hunt is what matters. And he has his magic dogs, his terrible dog, which is something, again, from African mythology. Actually, it's actually a stone from, I can't remember what culture, that's supposed to have these 3 hounds that can jump from it. And so I love pulling from all of these different things just to show, like, there's all this wonderful, rich magic, cultural magic, because
you're only scraping the surface,
right? It's like, look, I grew up reading, a dwarf, a ranger, and an elf meet in a bar, meet in a tavern,
and let's do that in every single.
And I was like, and I love those, but there's a whole world.
Truly.
Yeah, there's a world of other things we can be talking about, right? I tell somebody, I love Slavic type fairy tale stories.
Sure.
I didn't even get to have those. It was literally just a corner of Western Europe. I didn't even get the rest of Europe, right? Until a Howl's Moving Castle or something like that. And so, I really wanted to show that, look, all these things exist in here, and we can tell these wonderful stories. And so, one of my greatest inspirations for the many things was Spirited Away.
Okay.
Was the anime Spirited Away. And so,
a Miyazaki fan. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, huge.
Yeah, I think a lot of the listeners will, when you say Howl's Moving Castle, they'll think of the movie before they think of the book.
Of course.
You have to remind them that this is a book first.
The book first. They're going to think of the movie, especially now I've brought up Spirited Away. It's all Ghibli now.
You've made the connection. So I guess I'm curious about it. I'm going to ask a couple rapid fire questions I'm just curious about. But what's next for Abeni, if you, to the degree that you can share?
It's on that computer as I'm trying to finish up book 3. Because the kids grow, so you got to do them quickly.
That's true. The kids do grow.
And so, I really expanded a lot in here, and so now you can relate to this. It's a trilogy, so I've got to wrap a lot of things up.
Yeah.
And I've got to make choices about what gets solved and what doesn't.
Sure.
Right? She's hunting for a family. The idea of the ghost ships. What happens? We know that this one ends with the witch priest kind of ascendant. Right, he's going to change his name because he's become ascendant now, and it's very Empire Strikes Back. Things are not looking good. Even if there's a victory, there are all these other things happening, and so book 3 is really having to deal with them coming to terms with these things. And there are some characters from the first book. I remember the Storm Woman.
Okay.
There are a lot of things from the first book, characters from the first book who you might have thought they're coming back, right?
Okay, now I'm excited.
And so it's a lot has to happen in here.
I am thrilled to hear that, so I guess staying on the Star Wars kind of theme. I remember I was watching, I think I was watching an interview of yours a while back, and I saw like a Mandalorian helmet in your background.
I have what's his name? This is the way. I have his
okay, so
Pedro Pascal.
You got Pedro Pascal's head on. And so I give you, this is just kind of fun. I give you license to write a Star Wars story. I guess what do you do?
I've been thinking about this, and I don't have an answer yet about Star Wars is so huge, right? And I'm just I would really like to do something with a person who goes over to the Sith who's trying to find their way back.
Oh, okay.
I'd love someone who goes over,
a redemption
who is
story.
now, who is trying to find their way back from it. And they are, because I'm watching Andor right now.
It's so good.
And it's just me. I haven't finished, and I'm really hoping that they give me somebody who's like completely. There's somebody I'm hoping they can give me like where they realize, oh, this is wrong.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't be doing this.
How far are you?
Like episode 3 or 4. So I've got a ways to go.
Oh, it gets so much better.
I've got a ways to go. So yeah.
I wish I could go back to where you were.
Yeah.
So good.
I'm slowly watching it, and so. Yeah, I would. I think so. I'd love to do a redemption arc for a person who goes to Sith. Like, how do you get out? How do you extricate yourself from it?
And the other question, I'm curious, because we see success of like your adult literature and your middle grade literature. I guess given all that's happening in the world, all that's happening in your literary life.
Is something happening in the world?
Yeah, I know, it's a surprise. What are the themes and topics you want to explore next across age categories or mediums?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like the topics I'm discussing now. I hate to say it, the world keeps turning, and it arrives like at the same places. Like when I wrote Ring Child, I remember it came out the summer after the fall after the George Floyd protest. People were like, "Oh, the George Floyd protest." I was like, "Inspiring?" I said, "Well, let me explain to you how books
let me take you back hundreds of years."
Yeah, it was like I came up with that story like years ago.
Yeah.
I wrote it, and I wrote it a whole year before you would actually see it. And so no, but it just so happens that the topics I'm talking about are evergreen. Yeah. And so so this topic, I have a Dark Lord who wants to rule the world, and I have people who want to tell false histories, and these are not new things we're facing.
Sure.
These are old things that unfortunately we keep on dealing with. And I think that's what makes some of these stories. So whether it's Star Wars and a long time ago, watching those things, they speak to this moment, but they're also like they could have spoken to many other moments.
It's truly, and
right. These aren't new things that are happening. These are sometimes old things. I'm a historian. That's my other trade. Mm-hmm. And when people were talking about these moments that were unprecedented, and I was like, I teach U.S. history to 1877. Let me explain to you what happened in this thing called Reconstruction and what happened at the end of Reconstruction. Because you will realize that we've kind of been here before.
Sure.
Right? The idea of a redemption, second redemption, and so forth. And so, these things are unfortunately part of the human condition. Yeah. They just come repackaged differently, but we've been there.
And one thing that's hard, and I find that kids are actually better at picking up on some of these topics than when I go to like a World Con or another literary festival or something. I'm speaking to adults and trying to explain some of these themes, and they seem to go over readers or viewers' heads.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that when they're like a lot of these themes are so powerfully presented in your books, and yet readers may struggle to grasp them? How do you kind of let them arrive at it themselves, or do you ever try and say, hey,
I mean, I do, right? I don't think I purposely try to be abstract in a way where I'm not trying to hide it. I'm not trying to like, aha, later on. But like there's her village gets stolen by magic ropes and these warrior women who are stolen, and then they're marched off to the ghost ships.
Yeah.
I think people kind of hitting it on the head there, but I let people arrive at this because, like I said, when I was a kid, I didn't get all those things.
Sure,
I liked the story, and it took me at times much later coming to terms. I read The Hobbit and everything. I didn't think of the Ents as ecology. Sure. I didn't think of the orcs as the idea of industry, or I certainly didn't know anything about World War I. Tolkien himself said no, and I'm like, come on, man, come on. Are we not dealing with our trauma?
Yeah, there's some trauma.
Are we really not dealing? Are you really at the dead marshes, and you're telling me it has nothing? Come on, right? It's like, and he denies it, and I was like, yeah, I think we need to sit down and sit with our truths here that we're not telling ourselves.
They didn't have therapists back then. So,
It didn't have therapists, right? And so, I love if people come to their own conclusions, because then they also go up with their own theories. Yeah. And I go back, that's interesting. I didn't think of that. And who knows where my mind is. As writers, we don't know what we're putting into this. Sure. And people will sometimes pick up on things. And I'll have to sit back and think like, I wasn't thinking that, but was I? Mm-hmm. Because it's kind of there. And I didn't even think I did that, but maybe I did. Right? And so that's how I try to approach these things.
So that's how I know you're a teacher.
It has to be that they I mean, I'll say it like now. I'll say certain things. I've seen people like, oh, and I'm like, great, but I'm not going to
if
show
they
up.
arrive at their own conclusion.
I'm over their shoulders. Hey, did you get that part? Did you see what I did there? Yeah. Yeah. Let them arrive to it in their own time. Yeah.
I love that. Well, thank you for continuing to share these stories and explore these topics.
I wish we could have got to talk to you about your book. I would love to talk about that.